This is John Jackson Miller, and you're listening to the Star Wars Canon Podcast. May the Force be with you.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Canon Podcast, episode number 89. Can you believe it? Thank you for joining me. My name is Brian Miller. I am the host here of the Star Wars Canon Podcast, and I'm so glad you decided to join me to talk about our favorite thing in the world, yet again, Star Wars. I am flying solo this week. It's been a while since I've done a solo episode. It's kind of weird talking into a microphone without having the headphones on and hearing myself in the microphone. And so Yusuf kind of had his own thing going. I think he took his wife on vacation. Everybody else kind of had stuff going on and weren't able to make it this week. So I'm going to be flying solo. It's been a while since I've done a solo episode. Not sure if I remember how to do it. We're going to find out. So instead of me bouncing ideas off of Yusuf or Nick or Steven or JG, I'm going to be bouncing ideas off of you guys. So we are going to see how this goes. Stick with me. I've got a little bit to talk about this week. Going to be giving my spoiler review for The Mandalorian and Grogu. It's been out for over a week now. If you guys haven't seen it, that's kind of on you at this point. I'm going to be talking full spoilers about this movie, kind of what I like, what I didn't like, because there's some of each. I've got some pros and some cons. I haven't decided if the pros outweigh the cons yet. I think they do. I think the pros outweigh the cons, in my opinion. We'll find out. I'll probably figure it out on this episode and figure out what I really, really think about it. But I'm going to be kind of breaking down what I liked, what I didn't like, and all that. But before we get going, make sure to visit us on Facebook. Make sure to visit us on Twitter. Like and subscribe to the show if you guys are liking what you're seeing and if you kind of like my opinions, or if you like, hearing somebody talk about Star Wars who kind of tries to look at it as objectively as possible, but still kind of puts some opinions in there and tries to stay away from the negativity. If you guys are into that kind of thing, like and subscribe. And we put out new content each week, new episode each week. We did not do an episode last week because of the Memorial Day weekend here in the U.S. I had a lot going on with family and stuff, and being a veteran, I was kind of a part of some other things having to do with Memorial Day. So we did not put out a show last week, and I thought it was going to kind of work out. It was the weekend that Mando and Grogu had just come out. I really wanted to talk spoilers, but I didn't want to talk spoilers that soon after the movie had released. And so it kind of worked out a little bit to kind of talk about it this week instead. So that's why we didn't have an episode last week. So we are going to be getting into Mando and Grogu in this episode. Like I said, I've got a lot of pros and a lot of cons. I shouldn't say a lot. I've got pros and cons with this movie, in my opinion. Was it a perfect Star Wars movie? No, not by a long shot. Was it the worst Star Wars movie ever made? Not in my opinion. But it definitely wasn't the best either. In my opinion, and I might lose some people with this, in my opinion, it was leaps and bounds better than Rise of Skywalker as far as what it was and what it was meant to be. But like I said, I've got my issues with it. When Kirsty and I, we went and saw it last Thursday at an early showing. We saw it Thursday evening. And one of the things that I noticed going to see this movie was, so back in 2015, when Force Awakens came out, Kirsty had never been to, because we'd only been together like 3 years at this point, 3.5 years. That's wild to think about. Wow. Anyway, we'd only been together like 3.5 years. And she had never been to a midnight release of Star Wars. I was the one in our relationship that had introduced her to Star Wars for the first time and sat down and watched, at that time, the 6 or 7 movies that were out. The Clone Wars movie, I don't think I showed her until after everything else, but sat down and showed her Star Wars for the first time. And so I was excited to take her to an opening night release, right? And it didn't disappoint. Back in 2015, Force Awakens release did not disappoint. The cosplayers were out, the lines out the theaters, down the hallways. all the atmosphere was there. Everything I remembered from like when episode 3 came out, it was all there. And so I was excited to share that with her and for her to experience that. And I think a couple of the people that went and saw it with us were there. They cosplayed. One of them dressed up as like Mary Jade, if I remember right. But I remember that being so much fun and talking with other fans and, you know, speculating on what the movie was going to be and all this other stuff. And it was like that for Force Awakens. It was definitely like that for Rogue One. Last Jedi was even like that. But then Solo came out like 6 months after Last Jedi. And I remember it just felt like a normal movie release at that point. The theater wasn't as packed. The hype wasn't there. And then it was kind of the same thing for Rise of Skywalker. And so I wasn't quite sure how this one was going to go. I kind of leaned towards thinking that it was going to be more like a Solo, and it was. It was much more like Solo's release. I remember our movie theater was only like half full, if that. I'm not even sure if it was half full, to be completely honest. But I mean, we got to see Star Wars with some other people. And here's the thing. And if you guys have watched the last couple episodes of the pod, you know kind of my opinion going into this. What I was kind of afraid it was going to end up being was just like an abridged season 4 of The Mandalorian. That was kind of my expectation going into it. So I didn't have a high bar set for this movie going into it, which may be why I feel the way I do about it. I think some of the biggest issues people had with this movie is they were expecting like Empire Strikes Back, esque film that was just huge galactic stakes and just huge. I think that's kind of what they were expecting. And I don't blame them for expecting that out of Star Wars. Star Wars is a huge IP. It's a huge franchise that every movie should be the best Star Wars movie ever, right? I don't fault them for wanting to go into it with that, but I feel like where the ball got dropped on the fan side is that maybe we did expect too much out of it. And so as somebody who wasn't expecting a whole lot out of it going into it, I came out having enjoyed myself. I came out and was like, that was a fun movie. And I use the term movie loosely, which I'll get into here in a minute. But I walked out, and Kirsty and I were talking about it in the car and kind of what we liked and what we didn't like about it. And both of us were like, we had fun. We had fun with it. You guys know how I feel about Solo. Solo over the years has kind of grown on me a little bit. I didn't like it a whole lot when I went and saw it in theaters, but it's grown on me since. Kirsty loved Solo. Solo is one of her favorite Star Wars movies ever. She loves Solo because she's into the whole crime syndicate thing in the underworld. And she loves Kira. She loves Maul. And so all of that era was like really right up her alley. And I told her I liked Mando and Grogu more than I did Solo. She's the opposite. She liked Solo more than she liked Mando and Grogu. And we both feel like this movie had its issues. Don't get me wrong. This movie has got some great things in it. It's got some great moments. It's got some great story beats. It's got some great filming techniques, which I'll get into. But it's also got some things that are like, is that necessary? I don't know if we needed to do that. Was that necessary? I don't know about, and so, let's just get into it. I want to talk about the positives that I liked first, because as you guys know, if I tell you I love everything, right? You're not going to believe me when I tell you that I don't like something. It's not going to, if I don't like something, it's not going to come off as credible. So when I don't like something, I'm going to tell you guys I don't like something so that you'll kind of take to heart a little more what I do like, right? Some of the things I do like about this movie, I want to focus on the positives first. Like I said, this is a fun movie. I had a lot of fun with this. There's some good humorous moments in it. There's some good humor, good Star Wars humor, good Grogu humor. You know how Grogu is, right? There's some good Grogu humor in this movie. By the way, that Grogu puppet, say what you will about the movie. I don't care if you liked the movie. I don't care if you didn't like it. I don't care if you think it's the best. I don't care if you think it's the worst. Say what you will about this movie. But that Grogu animatronic puppet thing that they have to play Grogu is, I don't care what you say about anything else. That is a movie making technological marvel. That little thing, because I think it's, 5 people that puppeteer him? That thing, the way that it portrays its emotion and just the way it moves. And I mean, even with its body language, it's so lifelike. I mean, it actually feels like there's a life there. I just think that's amazing. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think there was only 1 or 2 shots of Grogu that were CG. Everything else was that puppet, that animatronic thing. And even him climbing, there's a scene in the movie where he's on Mando's back, and they're trying to get in to see Rada the Hutt. And Mando kind of stands up against the wall, and Grogu jumps off his back and climbs up a pipe and into a window. And even that was the puppet. That looked amazing. I don't know how they made that look so good. So I'm going to put this is just my opinion. That puppet, 2 puppets, is on par, in my opinion, as the CG T-Rex in Jurassic Park to other CG stuff. That holds up. That to me, in my opinion, that T-Rex in Jurassic Park stands up even to today's standards, in my opinion. It looks intimately real. Okay, so I've been of the mindset before somebody sold their soul to the devil to make that T-Rex look as real as it does. And now on the same spectrum, but with puppets and puppeteers and animatronics, I feel like somebody has sold their soul to make this thing look as lifelike and as real as it is. I loved Grogu in this, and he gets his whole moment to shine in this movie, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But I really loved Grogu in this movie. Actually, I'll talk about it right now. I loved Grogu in this movie. He's definitely not the same Grogu. He's definitely not the same Grogu that we were introduced to in season 1 of The Mandalorian. He seemed very, and I don't want to use the word baby because everybody referred to him as Baby Yoda. He seemed very toddlerish, childish, innocent, naive in The Mandalorian. And as we kind of went through the seasons of Mandalorian and into Book of Boba Fett, and now into this, he's really grown into his own. And it's only been a handful of years, canon-wise. There's a whole sequence in this movie where Mando is captured and Grogu's left behind, and Grogu really takes charge and goes after him and really shows what he's capable. He's got the courage now. He's got the confidence. That's the word I was looking for, confidence. He's got the confidence now to be able to apply all these things that Mando has taught him over the years. And which we see one of those moments when he's putting that little mudhorn token on him, and he's like, make sure it's tight enough that it doesn't move, but it's not too tight that it hinders your movement. That kind of teaching is great, and you can see Grogu take that to heart when he's going after Mando. And so I love Grogu in this movie. I think he was I think, honestly, Grogu is my favorite part of this movie. Everything that they were able to do with him as the puppet, everything that all the emotion they were able to convey with him is just insane to me. Because even something as simple as like BB-8 in The Force Awakens. Remember when The Force Awakens came out? We were introduced to BB-8 for the first time. They were able to convey emotion even through that thing. And so to be able to do it on something that you've got 5 people working on, different remote controls and different sticks and different aspects of them being puppeteered, to me, that's amazing. That is an amazing thing. I was blown away by that little animatronic. So, and by what they've done with Grogu and how he's really come into his own. He's not as fearful as he used to be. Even when Mando looks at him at one point, and he's like, "We could run," and Grogu's just like, "Meh." He's like, "Or we could fight." And, yeah, let's do it. Like he's really coming into his own, And I think his time with Luke really helped, and built that confidence a lot. And even what we saw in the Book of Boba Fett with that final battle in Book of Boba Fett, I think that helped a lot too with Grogu's confidence and kind of him growing into his own. Can't wait to see where they go with Grogu in the future with things. I know that there's no way they're going to let this be the end of Grogu's story. So going forward, I can't wait to see what he ends up turning into and becoming. As far as like a Force user as a Mandalorian, I can't wait to see where they go with it. Some of the other things I really liked about this movie, Rada the Hutt. I know there's some people that are torn on Rada. And I remember I told Kirsty when we came out of the movie, we were on our way home. I told her I thought it was funny that the last 2 movies that Dave Filoni kind of had his thumbprint on that were released in theaters, Clone Wars back in 2008 and now this in 2026, both of them were kind of centered around Rada the Hutt having been kidnapped and needing to be rescued. If you haven't seen the animated Clone Wars movie, that's kind of the whole premise of that movie. Anakin and Ahsoka are trying to track down Rada the Hutt, who was a Huttling at the time, Stinky, as Ahsoka affectionately calls him, and trying to get him back to Jabba the Hutt safely. Whereas in this movie, Rada is grown and has been kidnapped and is trying, his I think it was his aunt and uncle, the twins, his aunt and uncle are wanting him back so they can kill him because he's the heir to the kind of the Hutt throne and everything. And so I thought that was kind of funny that both movies so far, Dave Filoni has kind of had his thumbprint on, both centered around Rada being rescued in two completely different situations. But I liked Rada the Hutt a lot. I liked the fact that he was, and this is just my opinion, because like I said, I know people are split on him. To me, he was compelling as a character because he kind of laid it all out for Mando and Grogu when they meet him for the first time, when he's in the cage and he's getting the massage, which was kind of weird, but he's getting the massage, and he's talking about how, he's kind of held back by his father's shadow. Anywhere he goes, people are like, that's the son of Jabba the Hutt. He's met with a lot of animosity, a lot of disrespect. And so when he's in the gladiator arena, people cheer for him. And at first people were booing him, but as he wins and he's doing these fights and he's winning, people are starting to cheer for him. I understand where Rada was coming from, why he didn't want to leave, why he was naive enough to think when Mando's telling him, hey, the cards are stacked against you this time, they're going to kill you tomorrow. He's like, no, they ain't going to do that. My contract's up tomorrow. I understand why he thought that, he was being blinded by that love and that affection coming from people. But then when you get into that arena and he saw how fast they turned on him after Mando won, I think that was a great moment, and all that. So this whole gladiator fight, I loved the whole gladiator fight with Rada. Rada, in my opinion, when he's fighting, that is a beastly fight. I would not want to fight that. The way he lays down and rolls to get somewhere fast, and he comes down and, boom, and drops these battle axes. It was really cool to see that. It was a little off-putting to see a very jacked Hutt, which is kind of weird, which we've seen before in the comics, but to see it in live action, it was kind of weird to see it translated over. But I really liked Rada the Hutt a lot, especially how he was talking about he's not his father. He didn't want to be his father. He didn't want to be like Jabba the Hutt. That's why he was so gentle with Grogu. And I love him and Grogu together. Those two, I love him and Grogu. But I liked the fact that he was like, I'm not my father, and I don't want to be my father. And so this gladiator fight against Mando, I thought was a lot of fun, especially when Mando, when he's talking to, I don't remember the Imperial's name. I don't remember the guy they were after, the Ace of Staves that they were trying to hunt down. When he's talking to him and he finds out that the game is rigged against him, the fight's rigged. And I like how he was like, it's going to be a Dejarik fight. I thought at first I was like, that's a nice touch that you call it a Dejarik fight. That's kind of cool. And then when all the creatures started coming in for the first time, when that happens, when all the creatures, and I started realizing these are Dejarik pieces. These are the same creatures from the Dejarik pieces. That's hilarious. That's why it's called a Dejarik fight. But then when they did the overall view looking down and the whole arena looked like a Dejarik board, thought that was a great detail. I thought that was hilarious. Then I started laughing. I was like, that's why it's called a Dejarik fight. And I don't know if anybody else picked up on this. I hope you did. I'm hoping everybody picked up on this. It's something that I think us sweaties will pick up on, but like grandma who watches The Mandalorian on Thanksgiving when the family all comes to visit and there's a new season of Mando, if this is her first time watching Star Wars in the theater, obviously she wouldn't have picked up on it. But for us sweaties, we did when the one creature picks up the other and slams it to the ground. It's the callback. It's the same creatures that R2 and Chewie were playing with in the original Star Wars on the Dejarik board when R2 beat Chewie. Same move, too. Same piece, slamming the same piece, same way. I thought that was a very nice touch. I thought that was hilarious. To actually see that in live action, I thought that was really, really cool. And so, talking about creatures, too, this is something else I liked about this movie. It was a creature flick. This was very much a monster movie. There were so many creatures in this that were terrifying. That was like, don't want to go up against that. And I don't remember what they're called. The ones that were in the water. It's not the dragon snake. I know the dragon snake is from Empire. For those of you that don't know, that's the creature from Empire Strikes Back that was in the swamp that ate R2 and then spit him out. But I'm talking about the other ones. I don't remember what they're called. I think it started with an A. I don't remember what they were called. But they were based off an action figure from Return of the Jedi and off this creature that was, I think it was in Jabba's sail barge, if I'm not mistaken. To see those brought in a different aspect, in a different way, was really cool. Really enjoyed seeing the creatures in this movie. It was very much a creature flick. And that was what I told one of my buddies that I work with. He asked me to Snapchat him as soon as we got out and kind of give him my thoughts. And one of my thoughts was this was very much a creature flick. And so many monsters in this thing, between the dragon snake and those things that I just mentioned. And I mean, it's a creature flick. But yeah, this is some of the things that I really liked about it. I thought it was some of the nods that they did to previous projects, like Embo popping up, which, by the way, the dog thing that he had with him is not the same dog thing he had with him in Clone Wars. I guess this one's got a different name. The one in Clone Wars was like Marok. I don't remember what the name of this one was, but it's a different pet. But seeing Embo fight was really cool. Seeing him actually do the whole like head, like 720 spin thing like he does in Clone Wars, that was kind of cool. To see that fight, I was really hoping to see some Embo fight, and it was straight out of Clone Wars. It was so cool. I like how they handled Embo. One of the shots I really liked with Embo was when he's coming up on Mando's house, and Mando is starting to get that sense like somebody's outside, and he starts closing all the blinds, and he tells Grogu and the Enzelians, if I remember, is that what they're called, Enzelians? Tells them to hide under the floorboard, and if he gives a signal for them to run. And then it cuts to basically Embo's first-person point of view, and he's running up to the house, and you see him like parkour up on top of the house. That was an awesome shot. That was so neat. That was a nice touch. And everything with Embo, I loved everything with Embo. I don't think he ever said a word, and he was there when he was needed, and he wasn't there when he wasn't needed. I thought that was very nice. As far as pros go, I really did like this movie. I had fun with it. Like I said, it was very small stakes. It was not a galaxy-shattering movie. It was very much... Here's the other thing I liked about it. Not only did it not build on the fact that there is a larger conflict brewing in the galaxy, because there very much is another conflict brewing in the galaxy with the New Republic, the remnants of the Empire. We know Thrawn is out there. We know that this is brewing with the Shadow Council and all this. We know it's brewing, but this movie doesn't stand on that. This movie stands on a very self-contained personal story between Mandalorian and Grogu. And this is very much a Mandalorian and Grogu movie. It is rightfully titled. It is absolutely Mandalorian and Grogu. And I like the fact that it not only does it not stand on everything else going on in the galaxy, it doesn't even need to stand on the fact that there's been 3 seasons of The Mandalorian and a season of Book of Boba Fett. You do not have to have watched all of that to understand what's going on in this movie. Now, there are things in this movie that call back to some of the things that have happened in those seasons, but I don't think there's any essential viewing to understand anything going into this movie, to be completely honest. I think this movie, I talk about entry points a lot in Star Wars. I think this movie would be a great entry point for somebody who's never seen Star Wars, especially children, young or older children, young adults. If they want to get into Star Wars, if they've never seen Star Wars and you want to be introduced to that world, this is a good place to do it, I think. Now, granted, as somebody who keeps track of all canon and is on the spectrum and is very detail-oriented, I'm going to tell you, hey, go watch Mandalorian before you watch Mando and Grogu. That's just me, though. That's just me subjectively. Objectively, you do not need to watch anything before this to go into this movie. And so the fact that it doesn't even stand on its own show was very refreshing to me, and that this was just going to be a fun adventure that was very self-contained, very low stakes. It's kind of like, so we're going to talk about this a little bit here in a minute with mailbag questions, but it's kind of like Clone Wars. With the Clone Wars, we were first introduced to the idea of the Clone Wars in 1977 when the original Star Wars came out, when Obi-Wan was like, I fought in the Clone Wars the same as your father, and so we were like, the Clone Wars? What? That sounds wild. And then we ended up years later, 30 years later, got a series based on Clone Wars. And we got that story. But having known the story isn't essential to understanding that was brought up in A New Hope, and kind of, wow, there was this conflict called the Clone Wars that was obviously this big deal. We didn't need that story. You know what I mean? We got it and we love it, but we didn't have to have it. It's not essential to understand, oh, there was a conflict that happened back when Obi-Wan was younger that him and Anakin fought in, and that's what it was. Just like when you see Grogu, you see if you've never watched any other Star Wars before in your life, and you've definitely never watched Clone Wars, and you see Grogu for the first time hop out and he's using the Force, and you're like, that's a baby version of Yoda, and he's using the Force and he's Force jumping, and you're like, how does he know how to do that? You just kind of roll with it. If you want to know how he got to that point, you can go back and watch The Mandalorian. That history is there, but this story is not dependent on anything in the series, which I thought was great. That being said, let's roll into some of my cons, because I do have some cons with this movie. When we were building up for this movie, you guys have heard me say on this podcast multiple times, I swore up and down that this was going to be an abridged season 4, that this was going to be just a few episodes of the show put together, that this, I don't care what Dave Filoni or Jon Favreau says, this is season 4. I still stand by that. Having seen the movie, I believe that's the case even more so now. Not only because I said earlier, I use the term movie loosely, and I do, because yes, it was on a movie screen. Yes, it was in a movie theater, and yes, it was all edited together into one piece of content. But this was 3 episodes of the show put together into a long episode. And you can see where the breaks are in each episode. The first act has its own tone, the second act has its own tone, the third act has its own tone, which doesn't necessarily back up what I'm saying, because even The Empire Strikes Back, those 3 acts in The Empire had 3 different tones. However, each act in The Mandalorian and Grogu has its own middle, beginning, and end. Middle, beginning, and end. Middle, beginning, and end. And so, but there's one overarching storyline going through it. Kind of like with the original trilogy, each movie has a middle, beginning, and end, but it's all one overarching story. That doesn't mean it's one massive movie. It does have breaks in it. And so it would be kind of jarring if you took all 3 of the original trilogy films and you edited them together into one movie, because there's breaks, there's time periods in between each one, right? And so there's going to be things in between that happen that you don't see, and that you can't put those all into one movie. Yes, there's an overarching story to The Mandalorian and Grogu, but you can tell where each episode begins and ends. And it's not like they blatantly just was like, we have 3 episodes, let's put them together. It's not like they did that. They did try to edit them in a way that it was very cohesive, and props to them for doing it. I'll give them, A for effort. But you can tell that this was 3 episodes put together into one. It's a 3-episode arc is what it is. It is a 3-episode arc of the show. And in my opinion, having gone into this movie, kind of expecting that and kind of thinking that's where they were going with it, it might be why I had fun with it, because I didn't have a high bar set. I didn't have, I wasn't expecting Andor, I wasn't expecting Rogue One or Empire Strikes Back. I just was expecting this is going to be The Mandalorian. It's going to be 3 or 4 episodes of Mandalorian. And it was. It absolutely was. I feel like there was other things that got cut out. There were other things that got cut out to shorten this into a movie. And I think the things I feel like if they did cut anything out, it was probably for the best, because, and maybe I shouldn't say that. This movie does have some pacing issues. Like I said, the first act really hits the ground running, and then you kind of get into the second act with Grogu kind of doing his own thing and kind of on his own, and we really slow down. Like, we really pumped the brakes a lot on that movie to slow down for a minute to take a breath. And then we went back into the climax, and it was pretty good climax. Real quick before I move on with any other of the cons that I think with this movie, I forgot about a huge pro in this movie. I've got to touch on this before I forget. There's an entire sequence in this movie that is stop motion, and when I saw it, it made my heart sing. You've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. There's a scene where Mando is fighting these two big Enforcer droids, and the Enforcer droids are all stop motion. There have been times, like, for example, in Rogue One, when we went and saw Rogue One for the first time, I was like, seeing the AT-ATs was really cool. It would have been really cool if they'd have done, like, something stop motion. I know they'll probably never do that again, because now we have CG, and it's way cheaper to do it computer. I was like, but it would have been so cool to see, like, stop motion AT-ATs again. And then you cut forward to the Mando and Grogu, and there's a whole scene. These droids are actually stop motion. Every little aspect of them, just the way you can see the frame rate drop, basically. And you could see that, and I loved it. It worked, and it just had this charm to it that I loved. Say what you will about Last Jedi. I know everybody has their issues with it. You love it or hate it. I understand. There's a scene in Last Jedi that just every single time I see it, it makes me it brings tears to my eyes. It makes my heart fill with joy, and it's seeing Puppet Yoda. Seeing my Yoda that I grew up with again, and seeing the playful kicking and laughing, that was so great to see in The Last Jedi. Just like in this, to see stop motion come back into this, they didn't have to do that. They could have made just a CG, a couple of droids to fight, and it would have been fine. Nobody would have batted an eye at it. It would have been great. But the fact they went out of their way to make it stop motion, that was such a standout moment for me. I loved that. Anyway, I wanted to go back. I wanted to make sure that got mentioned in the pros section of this, and I forgot about it. I moved on to the cons way too fast. I forgot to bring up the stop motion thing. Love that. Anyway, back to the cons, if I can remember where I was at now. Pacing. When we got into the climax of this, and the X-Wings show up and all that, it felt kind of Return of the Jedi-ish to me. As far as tone goes, if I had to give this movie any tone compared to another Star Wars movie, I'm going to say the tone kind of matched Return of the Jedi. And that's just me. And I don't actually understand why that I feel that way. I just kind of do. But it did feel very Return of the Jedi-ish to me. Not like large stakes Return of the Jedi, but small scale. One of the things that I walked out of with this movie, and I told Kirsty as soon as we got in the car, I was like, not a fan of what they did with this. And it's weird, as much as I love Rod of the Hutt, the Hutt speaking English thing in live action kind of was weird. But it comes with some caveats, because this isn't the first time we've seen Hutt speak English. We saw Zero the Hutt in Clone Wars speak English. And really, there's no reason why they couldn't speak English. I guess. I thought their mouths were too wide and you needed lips to say some of the syllables Galactic Basic. Not English. I'm sorry, Galactic Basic. My bad. I could almost hear everybody yelling at me through the comments saying that. But to hear them, and I understand why they did it, but to hear them saying, they started in Huttese too. Even the twins kind of spoke English there for a little bit. Sorry, Galactic Basic. Even they spoke Galactic Basic a couple times. I understand why they did it. If you have a Hutt character who is going to be in the movie a lot, is going to carry the plot, you don't want subtitles the entire time you're watching this movie. I understand why they did it. But it's very off-putting hearing a Hutt speak Galactic Basic as much as Rada did. Excuse me. I'm still getting over this cough. And I didn't bring a drink in here with me to sit down and record with, so I'm trying to get through it. But anyway, it was one of those things that it kind of put me off a little bit to the movie. But like I said, I understand why they did it. It's like when you watch any period piece. I shouldn't say any period piece, because I've seen period pieces before that did all subtitles to the whole movie. I'm not a huge subtitle fan. I'm definitely not a dub fan. I can't stand it when they dub movies in English. And I can't stand it. I would rather not read subtitles the whole movie. I'd rather watch the movie than read. So I've seen period pieces though before that took place at a certain time and place. I'm thinking of one series in particular, but I don't really want to bring it up because I don't want people to be offended if I'm bringing that kind of thing up because it's not for everybody. I'll go ahead and say it. When Kirsty and I are watching like The Chosen, and it's taking place in, Israel back, in Jesus' time, and they're speaking English in the show. Obviously, back then they did not speak English, right? That was not, but it's in English for the sake of the audience, for their benefit. And I'm assuming canonically, like in that show, they would be hearing them speak Hebrew instead of hearing English. And I was the way I kind of applied that to this is that when the Hutts, especially Rada, when he's speaking English in this, I kind of take that as like an audience benefit thing, and maybe Grogu and Mando are actually hearing him in Huttese, and he's not actually speaking Galactic Basic. He's actually speaking Huttese, but they just transitioned from Huttese into Galactic Basic as kind of a way to make it easier for us to understand so we didn't have to read the whole thing. That's kind of my headcanon. I don't have anything to back up that that's what they did. But that's kind of my headcanon as to why he speaks Galactic Basic through the whole movie. But it was weird. It was off-putting. It was because we'd never seen it before really in live action. However, I'll say this. If that is what you're going to do from now on, this is the place to introduce it. Now is the time. Get everybody used to it now, because no matter when you start doing that, you're going to have people go, oh, why'd we do that? Get it out of the way right now with this. With a small adventure movie, not some high budget, high stakes film. Don't get to the Heir to the Empire movie and then have Rada pop up speaking English the whole time. You're going to be like, why is he speaking Galactic Basic? So if you're going to do it, introduce it now so that by the time we, over the next, if you're going to keep using Hutt characters, we'll get used to it. And then eventually it'll just be the norm. And so that's why it's not a huge con for me. It was just like weird. It's just weird to hear it. So, really, though, as far as cons go, I didn't have a whole lot. I think having talked it out now with myself and with you guys, I think I've come to the conclusion that my pros outweigh my cons. Because the cons, like I said, one of the biggest cons I had was Rada speaking Galactic Basic, but it's forgivable in my opinion because of, it could be headcanon that he was actually speaking Huttese the whole time and get us used to it now, blah, blah, blah. Kind of like, with Balin Skull, how you introduced us to this awesome character, and then sadly and tragically, the character that plays him passes away before he even gets to see that we love him so much. If you're going to recast him now, which they've done, but that's the right path to take with that character. If you're going to do it now. If you're going to rip the Band-Aid off with Hutt speaking Galactic Basic in live action, do it now. Let's just get it over with, establish the fact, and we'll move on with it. So I think that's kind of where that con was. Yeah, so I really don't have a whole lot of cons for it, other than it is 3 episodes. Now, so one of the things that can be said about that, about the low stakes, and I can understand, going into this movie, like I said, I had fun with it, but I can understand where people are going to have issues with it and feel like they got gypped out of a Star Wars movie proper. I understand where you're coming from. I get the gripes. I get it. I get the criticism. I totally understand where you're coming from. And I do not disagree with you. I don't feel like this movie needed to be a movie that was released in theaters. I firmly believe they put this together just for the sake of having a movie in theaters before Starfighter comes out. It had been several years since Star Wars had been in the theater. I feel like this was a safe bet for them to be like, we know everybody likes Mandalorian. Let's do a Mando and Grogu movie. Let's just put some episodes together. And I don't care what Jon Favreau or Dave Filoni say and how they were like, well, we decided to put together a story and blah, blah, blah. No, this was season 4. This is absolutely what season 4 was supposed to be. And so I like I said, I've got my gripes with it too. And I understand where people are coming from and wanting Star Wars. I saw somebody online talk about how, because I made the comment to them, I think it was like a TikTok live or something. They were like, what's your unpopular Star Wars opinion, if I remember right? And I put the opinion in there that the reason people didn't like Mando and Grogu was because they had the bar set too high. They were expecting it to be something like The Empire Strikes Back or Rogue One or something along those lines, knowing that this is based off of television characters, and that's probably what we were going to get. But at the same time, I can't fault people for wanting that out of Star Wars, because Star Wars is a big name franchise. Every movie, I can see where people were coming from, where they would say, hey, every movie should be a big deal. I don't disagree with you on that. I really, truly don't. I understand where you're coming from. I do not disagree. But at the same time, I don't have an issue with them releasing a small story like this once in a while. I even told Kirsty on the way home, Star Wars gets compared to Marvel a lot. And whether that's fair or unfair, that's not for me to say, because I do the same thing. Marvel got to the point where they were releasing 3 movies a year. Now I think now with the TV shows, they were doing like a movie and like a TV show, and maybe 2 TV shows, something along those lines. And they were keeping up with it. Now, the quality did dip when they started focusing more on quantity than quality. But think about like phases 1 through 3, how many movies we were getting a year. And there's a couple movies in there that were like, I don't know if I want to watch that one again. But for the most part, I think they batted like 95% of success rate on these movies. They made billions of dollars, right? Why can't they do something like that with Star Wars? Because Kirsty and I were talking about it on the way home. And I was like, what if they got to a point? Because we were talking about how small stakes this movie was and how self-contained it was and everything like that. And I was like, why wouldn't they be able to release maybe a big Star Wars movie in December, like a tentpole Star Wars movie? There's rumors that episodes 10 through 12 are going to be made here before long. Simon Kinberg is working on 10 through 12. If you're going to release a huge movie like that, a huge tentpole Star Wars movie with galactic consequences and all that, release it in December. That seems to be like the working time right now for Star Wars, since we're in this new era. But there's nothing that says to get us through the year, to kind of tide us over, to get us into that. There's nothing to say that every year or 2 you couldn't release a small little standalone movie like this in May. There's nothing that says you couldn't do that. Then you're getting 2 movies a year. Then if you get something small and it's not for everybody, like this one, I don't think Mando and Grogu is for everybody. If you get a movie like this that everybody's like, well, I didn't really need that, you wasted a movie slot. Well, don't worry about it. 6 months from now, you're going to get a tentpole Star Wars movie. As of right now, we're going to be getting, or the way it used to be at least, we would get a movie a year. So if you go to 2 a year and you do one big one and kind of one small self-contained story like this, then those who just want the big tentpole movies, you're still getting your 1 movie a year. You're not really wasting a slot. And everybody else is kind of getting these cool little fill-in stories like Mando and Grogu. And I think something like that could work, honestly, if you're going to go to 2 movies a year. Because we've talked about before, and I know that's been a topic before with people talking online about, do we go to 2 movies a year? How much Star Wars is too much Star Wars? I think, because we used to talk about we would do 2 big tentpoles a year. If you did 2 big tentpole Star Wars movies a year, Marvel's doing it, why can't we? But now, having seen Mando and Grogu, I'm more of the mindset, why couldn't we do a big tentpole movie in December and kind of do a little standalone story, kind of like what we did with Mando and Grogu, in May every year? And don't tell me it can't be done, because I fully believe that Mando and Grogu was season 4. So instead of doing another season of a TV show, make a little standalone movie. Here's something else we talked about. Kirsty and I talked about on the way home. Acolyte kind of got brought up. And we've talked about Acolyte a lot, and everybody, their mother has talked about Acolyte a lot. And so I don't want to beat a dead horse. I don't want to do that. But I'll say this. The Acolyte, in my opinion, having seen Mando and Grogu, could use a little bit of editing to just make it a movie. Had they cut out like all of the showing the same footage in 2 episodes, twice from 2 different points of view and all that, blah, blah, blah. I think that series could be edited into an actual film that would work. There's things I would change, obviously, but just taking what you have and editing it together, I think you could get the same kind of product like what we got out of Mando and Grogu. Something that was meant to be a season of television, but it got shortened and condensed into a self-contained story movie. And so I think not every series they release has to be a series. Some of them work really well. Skeleton Crew worked really well as a series. Andor worked really well as a series. Some of the series I think could be shortened into movies, and some of them have been. I know that there's been fans that took like the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, shortened it into a movie, made it a lot better. And so and maybe season 4 of Mando, this is the first time where they were like, hey, we condensed it and made a decent film out of it. Yeah, it's the first time that we've done it, and it could probably use some tweaking. The process could use a little bit of tweaking. But even Ahsoka said, I love firsts. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not. You know what I mean? And so that's a Dave Filoni line. So the fact that they're trying that, in my opinion, like I said, I'm going to die on the hill. That's what they did. The fact that, in my opinion, they're trying that, I shouldn't say the fact. In my opinion, that they are trying that, I think bodes well. And I think if they have a series that they're looking at, like Acolyte, and you say, man, there's a lot of extra stuff there. There's a lot of fat that we could trim. Let's cut it down and make a self-contained Star Wars movie, release it in May, and then we'll release episode 37 or whatever in December. Then by all means, I think, at least then we're getting to go to the movie theater more times than twice as much as we normally would be to see Star Wars. And at the same time, you don't have to go to the theater to see it. You can if you want. It's now with streaming platforms and everything, give it a couple months. It's going to be on Disney Plus anyway. Mando and Grogu is going to be on Disney Plus in a month and a half, 2 months, guarantee it. And so I now that they've done this, and if they have done what I believe they have done, there's no excuse we can't go to 2 movies a year. I'll say a movie and a half. We'll call it that, a movie and a half. Big movie, little self-contained movie. And then have your series drop in the fall, like an Ahsoka season 2, have that. I know it's coming out in April of next year, but I feel like the big series like that do really well in the fall. And then maybe in the spring, that's when you release stuff like Visions. Maybe your animated stuff comes out in spring, your live action series come out in the fall. Big tentpole movie in December, standalone kind of film, summer, May and summer. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think after having talked about this movie and really thinking about it and really comparing it to some of the other things we've gotten in Star Wars, I think that's the route that I would kind of suggest that they go. Maybe I'm crazy, though. I just think that's I think that's a formula. I don't want it to be just like Marvel. I want it to be its own thing, kind of like DC is doing their own thing. They're not using the same formula. I don't want the same formula, but I think that's a formula that could work for Star Wars. So Mandalorian and Grogu, I'm going to end up out of 5 stars. I think what I told the guys in the chat, I think I gave it a 7 out of 10. I was going to give it 5 stars, which I guess would be 3.5 stars. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it. I had fun with it, because I didn't go into it expecting Luke, I am your father level plot twists or big galactic fights or anything like that. So I think going into it with low expectations helped me really have fun for what it is. There's other Star Wars movies that are bigger scale and everything that I would also give a 7, but for what it is what I'm judging it off of. So it's a TV movie, in my opinion. And so for a TV movie, I'm excited I got to go see Star Wars on the big screen again. And I got to see 3 more episodes of The Mandalorian, which I love The Mandalorian. So how is this a loss? You know what I mean? I've seen people talk about how, I love the show, but I'm really mad that this was just 3 episodes of The Mandalorian. If you love the show, why are you not excited that you got 3 more episodes of the show? You're just mad that they called it a movie and it wasn't. That's what you're mad about. And so don't take it out on the movie, because the movie had a lot of good in it. It really does. It's a fun adventure. And so for what it is, I give it a 7 out of 10. So those are my thoughts on The Mandalorian and Grogu. Drop your comments below. Let me know what you guys thought of the movie. Don't worry about spoilers. Everybody should have had time to watch it at this point. If you agree with me, great. If not, great. Let me know why. Keep it civil is all I ask. And one of the things, I saw this thing that was talking about, man, Star Wars is so back. And I'm like, it's because, you can tell Star Wars is back because there's people complaining about it again. So that's how you know Star Wars is back. It truly is. So sound off below. Let me know what you guys thought of the Mandalorian and Grogu. Yeah, hopefully somebody, I know there's nobody at Lucasfilm watching this. I know there's not. But if there is, in the off chance that there is, look at that formula. Small movie in the summer, big movie in the winter, live action series in the fall, animated stuff in the spring. I think it would work out great. You're getting Star Wars year round. You're switching up the mediums a lot. And so it's not just movie, series. You're breaking it up. And then you can sprinkle your books and everything in between, and the comics the way you already do. So that way we're getting Star Wars year round. There's no big gaps. Everything still has its moment and everything, still has its time, So anyway, that's my opinion. Take it or leave it. It's not worth anything. My opinion is not worth anything. But that's kind of where I'm at with it. So sound off. Let me know what you guys thought of Mando and Grogu. Let's talk about the villain bracket for a minute. So like I said, we didn't do an episode last week. So week before when we did the episode, we had Revan going up against Chimera. Now remember, this is not who would win in a fight. These are villains who you think is cooler. That's what Yusuf kind of pushes, is which character is cooler, not who would win in a fight. If it's who would win in a fight, man, a lot of these votes I think would go the opposite direction than what they did. But this one, last week we spun the wheel and we got Revan versus Chimera. And in a landslide vote, Revan won. And I don't mean like kind of a landslide. It was a massive landslide vote. And we had the most votes on our Facebook page we've ever gotten on a villain bracket before. And they were all for Revan, I think, except for like 3 or 4, maybe 5, I think, for Chimera. So Revan beat out Chimera for last episode's villain bracket. Usually what we do to get the next 2 names is we have a wheel that we spin with all the names on it, but we only have 2 names left. So there's no point in spinning the wheel because we already know which 2 it's going to be. And this week, our villain bracket, and this is going to be an interesting one. I think this is going to be a very interesting one, is Vader versus Plagueis. Darth Vader versus Darth Plagueis. Not who would win in a fight, but which villain is cooler. I think we all know who both of those characters are. There's not a whole lot of point in kind of sitting and discussing a background of all of them and talking about where they came from and what they believe and all of this and the tragedy of both of them, or, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis. I didn't mean to do that. Cause Vader was a very tragic character. That's why I said that. And then I was like, oh, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis' wife. But anyway, go vote. You guys can vote on our YouTube channel. I'll post it there. You guys can vote on our Facebook page. You can vote on Spotify if you're listening to this on Spotify. Scroll on down. The poll should be right there on this episode. You guys can vote multiple times if you want. Vote on which character you think is cooler. And if there's a way to comment and let us know why you're picking that character. We love hearing your guys' opinions. It's the whole point of the show, is to talk to you guys and to talk to other fellow Star Wars fans and to get your opinions and to keep it civil. We can all disagree. We can agree to disagree. If we all agreed on everything, we'd have nothing to talk about. But you can disagree and keep it civil. It's entirely possible. I don't understand why the world tells you have to either love something or hate something. There's no gray area. And if somebody has even one thing that is not common ground with you, they're the enemy. I don't understand that. I've never understood that. I don't know if it's just because everybody's been raised to think their opinion matters. I know that's kind of BS coming from me because I started a YouTube channel to put my opinion out. But like I said a while ago, my opinion doesn't mean anything. It doesn't alter anything. It doesn't change anything. It's just my opinion. And so let us know. Keep it civil. I want to hear what you guys think. Who is cooler? Who would win in a popularity contest? Darth Vader or Darth Plagueis? Sound off below, and we will read the winner on next week's episode. And I think this is the last villain bracket. I think those are the last 2 characters for this category, and I think this is the last category Yusuf had put together. So next week, we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do next. I think he's wanting to pit winners versus winners to get down to who is the coolest villain out of everybody. And so I think that's what we're going to end up doing. I think we're going to go back to where we started. I think we've been doing this villain bracket for like 4 years, and we finally made it through. That's mainly my fault, just because of how long, the hiatuses we've taken between episodes and stuff sometimes. So it's taken us 4 years to get through this villain bracket, and this is finally the last one where we are going to be spinning the wheel. Or we didn't even spin the wheel, but this is the last one where we're putting 2 new characters up against each other for elimination. So go vote. We can't wait to see what your guys' opinions are. And like I said, let us know why you guys pick who you pick. For the last segment of the show, let's get into some mailbag questions. Each week, you guys send in a bunch of mailbag questions, and we go through and pick a few out. This week, I've got 4 questions. One of them is a little weird. I'm not gonna lie, but we're gonna address it anyway because I don't think it's meant to be worded the way that it's worded, and you guys will know which one I'm talking about when it comes up. But how do you guys get a question on the Star Wars Canon Podcast? You can go to our website, starwarscanon.net/mailbag. There's a submission form there. You can put your name and email in there, and you can type out your question, and it sends it directly to me. We can go through and pick out a few each week. This week, I've got 4 questions. The first question, let's just jump right into it. The first question comes from Sasha Benson. And Sasha writes in and says, "Hey, Brian and crew, we just watched Mando and Grogu and had a blast with it. Can't wait to hear your thoughts on it. Our question is this. What if Ahsoka had listened to Maul in Siege of Mandalore and joined him? Love your show and can't wait to meet you at Celebration." Thanks for the question, Sasha. Yeah, so I brought this up to Kirsty yesterday. We were in the car. Because like I said earlier, she's a big Ahsoka, Maul, Solo, Crime Syndicate kind of fan, right? She loves that era. And so I kind of brought this question up to her, and I was like, actually, what it was I was bringing up the weirdly worded question we're going to get to in a minute. And then she ended up reading all the rest of them and was like, oh, that's kind of a cool question. I'm assuming what you're speaking about, what you're referring to, is one of the last episodes of Siege of Mandalore when Maul and Ahsoka are getting ready to fight. And Maul is basically telling Ahsoka that, you know, this has been the Emperor's plan all along, or this has been Palpatine, or the Sidious's plan all along, how he's played both sides of the war, and how Anakin Skywalker is the key to all of it. I'm not sure how that would go had she, because she almost did. She almost did until, I think, if I remember right, I think it was Maul brought up Anakin. Here's what's interesting about that. And before I answer your question, here's what's interesting about that conversation. You know, having thought about it a little bit and and thinking about what Maul was telling Ahsoka. Maul is privy to all of this information because he was Sidious's apprentice, right, back during Phantom Menace. And what's really interesting is that Maul knows that Anakin is the key to all of it. So hear me out. By the time Anakin comes into it in episode 1, if you watch episode 1, Maul and Palpatine have this plan. Obviously, Maul knows the whole plan because when Savage was talking about, you know, oh, the clones have attacked, he's like, oh, so it's happened. The galaxy is at war. It's actually happened and all this. He knew this whole plan. Maul knew this whole plan moving forward. And what's interesting is he knows about Anakin because in episode 1, when Maul comes into the picture, he tries to run Anakin over first off. Got to give it to Maul for that. He was going to run some random kid over in the desert. Just for the sake of running him over, which is kind of hilarious to me. But anyway, by the time Anakin comes onto the scene, and Palpatine's made aware of Anakin, and, you know, what caught Palpatine's eye in Anakin was the fact that he was able to blow up that droid control ship around Naboo. That's when he was like, and young Skywalker, we will watch your career with great interest. That's where that came from. He knows Anakin blew that up. But at the time, when Anakin did that, Palpatine didn't know who Anakin was from anybody. He just had no idea. If you look, he kind of ignores Anakin and everything else up to that point in episode 1. Anytime they're in a room together, kind of ignores him because he has no idea who he is. He's just some random kid, blonde-haired kid that's just tagging along. By the time Palpatine knows of Anakin, Maul's already cut in half and is down the pit and never really talks to Sidious again on good terms. You know what I'm saying? So I'm curious as to how Maul knows that Anakin is the key to all of it. Now, granted, Maul and Anakin fight in Clone Wars, you know, and Anakin's after Maul with Obi-Wan and everything. And they're aware of each other, obviously. But I'm curious as to how Maul came to the conclusion that Anakin was the key to all of it. And how he's been grooming him since the beginning. Like, so how does Maul know that? That's the story that I don't know if we have been told, how Maul is even aware of the relationship between Palpatine and Anakin. But we'll leave that to the side for right now. But that was just something that kind of popped in my head when I was thinking about this. But had Ahsoka listened, I don't know how this would have gone, because had she taken Maul at his word, where were we at in episode 3 when that happened? We were at the point where, if I'm not mistaken, Obi-Wan was on Utapau. Anakin was already really being manipulated by Palpatine at this point. It was the whole, if I'm not mistaken, I think at this point in the timeline, Anakin knew Palpatine was a Sith. I think Palpatine had already revealed it to him. I'm not sure. Details could be fuzzy. If not, it was happening at the exact same time. Because later on, after she captures Maul, that's when the whole thing is going down. She can hear it going down with Mace and Palpatine and Anakin. And, no, I need him, and all. So, if I'm going to say, I'm thinking what was happening at that exact moment. I think it was when Palpatine was, or at least close to that point, where Palpatine was revealing himself as a Sith Lord to Anakin. Had Ahsoka shown up with Maul at the same time that Anakin showed up, see, and that's where I feel like it lines up. I feel like it lines up right there. If he had gone with Ahsoka to the Jedi Council to explain to them everything he knew about Sidious and that he was Palpatine and all this, because Maul knew, I feel like when Anakin is standing there, or when he comes up to talk to Mace and says, I've just learned a terrible truth. I think Palpatine is the Sith Lord we've been looking for. They're in the shuttle bay. Like, they're in the bay where all the ships are at. I can see in my mind, had Maul decided to go with Ahsoka, or Ahsoka had humored him, and she brought him to the Jedi Council, they could have been landing the same time Anakin comes up and says, hey, I think Palpatine is the Sith Lord we've been looking for. And then Ahsoka and Maul land, and Ahsoka's like, what's going on? And then they tell her, maybe Mace would have told her, because he'd have been like, okay, it's not your business, citizen. But I think Anakin would have been like, snips, I think we just found out Palpatine's the Sith Lord. And Maul would have been right there. Of course, that conversation may have not happened yet, because Anakin would have seen Maul and been like, what are you doing with him? Why is he here? I think that would have been the conversation first. And then Anakin, maybe Maul would have said something along the lines of, I want to tell you about Palpatine and Sidious. And then Anakin would be like, that just backs up what I just told you. He just told me the same thing. So had she listened to him and had they done this, I think that was like the very last possible second that anything could have been done to alter the course of like Anakin becoming Vader and Palpatine fully taking over and all that. I think that was the final moment that anything could have been done to stop it from happening. Now I say that maybe it was too late at that point. It might have been too late at that point, because she was bringing Maul in. Now that I'm thinking about it, she was bringing Maul in, and they were in hyperspace, and all this other stuff was already happening. Of course, you wouldn't have had to wait for the whole duel to happen and everything and go through all of that. They would have just probably went. Of course, I don't see Ahsoka leaving her troops behind to fight Mandalorians either. Anyway, it's really, there's a big gray area there. But I can just see in my mind them coming in and saying, hey, we all need to work together. This is what's going on. And then, instead of just Mace taking Kit Fisto and Sassy Tin, I think is how you say his name, and Eth Koth to go arrest Palpatine, I think Anakin would have been there. Ahsoka would have been there. Maul would have been there. Maybe those other Jedi too, because they were all there having the same conversation with him, because they were all going to see Palpatine anyway. I think it would have been those 7 taking Palpatine down instead of just the 4 of them. And here's the other thing too. If it was the 7 of them, if it was a 1-on-7, right? If it was a 1v7 and it was those 7, I still see Kit Fisto going down. I still see Eth Koth dying. And I still see Sashi Tin, I think is how you say his name. I still see him going down. So it would have been, I think the ones left standing would have been Maul, Mace, Ahsoka, and Anakin. And maybe Anakin wouldn't have been there, possibly, if Maul had told them the same thing. Anakin is the key to all of this. Skywalker is the key to this. He's been grooming him from the get-go. Maybe that would have opened Anakin's eyes, and he'd be like, maybe I shouldn't be a part of this. Of course, at the same time, maybe that would have opened his eyes, and he would have been able to go be a part of it and not have been blinded by the lies of Palpatine talking about Padme and all this. Who knows how it would have went down. But I love what ifs. I love what if questions. And like I said, JG is the big what if guy, right? JG is the one that's really good at what ifs. But this is a fun one to think about because it would have seriously altered a lot. And so I honestly, I don't know how it would have gone down. In my mind, it's something like that. Something maybe Palpatine would have went down. Maybe it would have been, Anakin taking the final swing on Palpatine. Especially with Ahsoka there, because Ahsoka meant a lot to Anakin. Anytime he saw her, like when he saw her for the first time, he was like, "How are you?" When he saw her on the hologram for the first time, he was excited to see her. He had that connection with her. So maybe having her there as kind of the anchoring point for him in that fight would have been good. Mace wouldn't have lost his hand. He wouldn't have Windu wouldn't have went out the window and all of that. And it's a vastly different timeline. If she had, honestly, I think that is one of the pivotal moments that had she just gone with him, I think everything would have turned out okay. Honestly, or if Maul had gone with Ahsoka, I think it would have all been okay. Truly. It would have still been a confrontation there, but I think it would have turned out all right. So what do you guys think? Let us know in the comments. What if Maul and Ahsoka had teamed up to go tell the Jedi Council about Palpatine and about Anakin being groomed and all this? Let us know. I want to hear you guys' thoughts. Question number 2 this week comes from Trent Bowler. And Trent says, my friends and I were discussing canon and how it's all connected and figured we'd ask you this one. How much of Star Wars canon would be decanonized if Clone Wars was removed from canon? Keep up the great work. Thanks for the question, Trent. So there's 2 answers to this. Kirsten and I were kind of discussing this in the car yesterday. There's 2 answers to this. The first answer I'm going to give you is kind of the simple one, and I have some things to back it up. Nothing at all would change. Nothing at all would change. I think what you're saying is, what else would no longer be considered canon because it's built off of Clone Wars, correct? I'm going to say the first answer is nothing at all would change. We would still get Rebels. We would still get the clones. We would still get Rex and Rebels. We would still get the Ahsoka series. We would still get all of these other things. We'd still get Maul in Rebels and everything like that. And here's my reasoning why. I kind of talked about it a little bit earlier with Clone Wars as an example for having previous stories. If they were to decanonize all of the Clone Wars series today, and they said everything from, the Battle of Christophsis all the way up to the Siege of Mandalore, none of those stories ever happened. We are decanonizing them. They're legends. That's what we'll just say. They're legends at this point because they do exist. And if it was decanonized, that means it exists. So they would be considered legends at this point. Let's say all of that's considered legends. Nothing else changes. The Ahsoka series, live action series still happens, in my opinion. All this still happens because I'm trying to think of what order I want to say this in. When we were introduced to the Clone Wars in episode 4 for the first time, we didn't know anything about the Clone Wars. We just knew they existed. Everything was kind of established at the fact that they did happen. The whole downfall of Anakin and all of that had happened. We just didn't have those stories yet, but they did happen. Obi-Wan, as a character, if he was a real life character, because he's fiction, we all know this is fiction, but if he was a real life character, in his mind, he has the memories of everything that happened back then, even though we don't have the canon stories for it, right? So every single thing that happened in Clone Wars and the prequel movies, Obi-Wan remembered in 1977 when you're looking at him on screen. He already knew that whole story. We didn't know that story. He had those memories. He already knew everything that was going to happen in the prequels. We didn't. But we didn't have those stories. They weren't canon. They didn't even exist yet, right? Something doesn't have to be canonized for it to have effects in canon. All right? And that's just, this is, like I said, this is the first simple answer. And a really good example of that is Darth Bane. I've had this book sitting on my desk for like the last 4 episodes. Darth Bane. Darth Bane as a character is canon, right? This is my favorite trilogy of Legends books, by the way. Darth Bane, and this is an amazing trilogy. If you haven't read this, what are you doing? Anyway, this is a great story. This is a great history of Darth Bane and coming up with the rule of two and having the Army of Light fight the Brotherhood of Darkness and all of that and training Darth Xana and all of this. Great story. Not canon. This is not canon as much as I want it to be. Now, they could come out tomorrow and say the Darth Bane trilogy as it is currently written is considered canon from here on out. Going on the shelf. I'm going to try to find hardbacks of it, but it's going on the shelf. But this story doesn't have to be canon for Darth Bane to be canon in Star Wars. You get what I'm saying? They've established in the movies, just like they did with the Clone Wars, that the Clone Wars existed and they happened. It's been established in the movies that Darth Bane started the rule of two. And that, I guess actually that was in Clone Wars. That's ironic, isn't it? It's actually in Clone Wars that Darth Bane started the rule of two. But anyway, I'm still going to use it as the example. It's been established that Darth Bane started the rule of two. Now, we don't have a canon story on how that went down. We have this, which is a legend. So if Clone Wars was decanonized, they would be considered legends, and we wouldn't have a story on what happened during the Clone Wars. But they still happened. You get what I'm saying? So you could say, oh, hey, we're going to do this Ahsoka live action series. Well, who's Ahsoka? Oh, you find out in the series, Ahsoka's master was Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars. You don't necessarily have to have all of the Clone Wars series canon to understand later on, oh, she was the apprentice of Anakin Skywalker. See what I'm saying? The DC movies are a great example of this. And it's murky. Don't get me wrong. It's murky. And I still don't fully agree with what DC has done. But it's like when James Gunn did the Suicide Squad, when it was still the DCEU. That was canon to the DCEU. Then you move forward into some of the other things that has happened, with like Creature Commandos, that is canon to the DCU. Well, the Suicide Squad is not considered canon to the DCU, but there's things in it that are considered canon because they're mentioned in the DCU. So what's canon and what's not? That was removed, but this is still built on the foundation that events still happened in that, even though this didn't happen. It's kind of like Peacemaker Season 1, another DC thing. Season 1's not canon, but Season 2 is. And the only things that are canon in Season 1 are what's mentioned in Season 2. So you can have projects that are built off of things that are not considered canon that are still canon. So that's one answer, is that if you decanonized Clone Wars, nothing else changes. You still get everything else. You still have Rex popping up in Rebels, and you can say, oh, I was a clone fighter in, the Clone Wars with Anakin Skywalker. That's no different than Obi-Wan telling Luke, I fought in the Clone Wars the same as your father. That's no different. So that's one answer, is that nothing would change. The other answer is that a lot of stuff would change if Clone Wars was decanonized. Because if you want to go the route that all this other stuff depends on that being canon, then you lose a lot of Rebel stuff. You lose all of Maul and Obi-Wan in Rebels. You lose Rex and them popping up in Rebels. You lose Rex being retconned into Return of the Jedi. You lose the Ahsoka series. You lose so much stuff. There's so many novels that would be decanonized because they're based off of Clone Wars. Literally anything based off of the Clone Wars series would be decanonized if that was the case. So I'm assuming what you meant is the ripple effect it would have. If this was taken out, what else would come with it? What other strings are tied to it that if you pulled this, other things would come popping out too? I assume that's how you went. But I like to think of the first answer I gave, is that nothing would change. Everything else would still be there. We just wouldn't have those stories of what happened during Clone Wars. So, but man, now that I'm thinking about it, what all would be pulled out if Clone Wars is decanonized? Anything that refers to anything at all that happened in Clone Wars would no longer be canon. So a lot of novels, the Brotherhood novel would definitely be pulled out. Dark Disciple would be pulled out. Oh my gosh, there are so many freaking books that would be pulled. So many comics, so many things that are tied to Clone Wars that would be pulled out. Dooku Jedi Lost wouldn't be canon anymore. Oh my gosh. Tales of the Jedi would be gone. Tales of the Empire. Heck, even the new Thrawn books would be decanonized because there's whole portions of them that take place during the Clone Wars and refer to Clone Wars. Lords of the Sith would be decanonized because it's got clone royal troopers in it. Oh my gosh. What else? A lot of Andor would be decanonized. There'd be so much. The original, well, no, yeah. If you want to go this far, the original Star Wars would be decanonized because it mentions Clone Wars. The original Star Wars would not be canon anymore, which kind of, in its own right, decanonizes everything else that came after that. So, if I'm going to give you this answer, I'm going to go with the first answer I gave you. Nothing changes. It's just there's a void there, and so I guess you could decide which way you'd want to go with it. But it's a really interesting question, and how much actually depends on the Clone Wars and some of those stories and those characters. There's a lot that depends on that when you really start thinking about it. So the simpler answer is that nothing else would change at all, and we would just have the void there and just not have those stories told. You know what I mean? So thanks for the question, though. What do you guys think? I want to hear your guys' opinions because this is like a toss-up thing, in my opinion. This could go one of either of those ways. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'd like to kind of follow up on some of these. If you guys drop some knowledge, if you guys drop some knowledge on me in the comments, maybe we'll bring it up on the next episode. Thanks for sending in the question, Trent. I do appreciate it. The third question this week. This is going to be a tough one to kind of talk about. And I part of me debated even putting it into the show because of the nature of it, but I'm not sure the nature of it was meant the way that it's worded. And when I read you guys the question, I think you'll understand. So let's just start with this. You guys get the same shock value that I got when I read this question. And so then we'll talk about it. The third question this week comes from David Lane. And David says, do you think we'll ever get an R or X-rated Star Wars film or series? I love your attitude and outlook on Star Wars. Thanks for the question, David. Okay, first off, I want to just say, I am not making fun of you, David. I'm not laughing at you. I'm not, none of that. I'm not judging or anything, any kind of aspect of that at all. I promise you I'm not. Because I'm not sure if you actually meant X-rated or if you meant unrated, because there's a huge difference between unrated and X-rated. Let's start with the simple one first. R-rated, do I think there'll ever be an R-rated Star Wars movie or series? No, I don't think there ever will be. I hope I'm wrong. I hope there's some really cool stories that they could tell that are really graphic and gory and terrifying, especially surrounding Vader and some stuff. I really, really hope that someday they're just like, let's just go all out and make like a really gritty, like adults only kind of Star Wars movie. A lot of dismemberment, lightsaber dismemberment, a lot of, you know what I mean? And you would almost have to do it centered around a villain. Like you'd have to do a Darth Bane or Darth Vader or, something along those lines. So let's get into the second part of the question. X-rated Star Wars film or series. I'm going to answer this both ways. X-rated, no. There will never be an official canon X-rated Star Wars project. There are a million X-rated Star Wars parodies online. All you got to do is get on Google. So that's a whole different thing. This is why, like, the question is so innocent. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I don't think you meant X-rated. I'm wondering if you meant unrated, which is a much different thing. Unrated basically means no bars, there's no standard. You tell the story you want to tell, and that's what you go for. Whatever is in it is in it. Kind of like along the lines of, so like, Logan, like the movie Logan, the Marvel movie Logan, X-Men. That was very much, there's an unrated version of that, and there's nudity in it, there's cussing, there's, dropping serious curse words, there's horrible dismemberments, there's horrible deaths. That's what I am kind of thinking of when I think unrated, right? Where there's literally nothing holding, there's no standard, right, of what's allowed and what's not. What goes. X-rated is very much adult oriented in one specific area. You know what I mean? So Do I think there'll ever be an unrated project? I doubt that very seriously. We'll get an R-rated before we ever get an unrated. And the odds of us getting R-rated, I think, are incredibly low. I don't think we'll ever get anything like that. I wish they would. If we ever did, man, whether it was good or not, I would applaud Lucasfilm for really stepping out and trying something like that. Marvel did it. Here we go, comparing Marvel to Star Wars again. Marvel did it. You know, all these Marvel MCU movies kind of leading up were basically family movies. You know, there wasn't a whole lot in the way of, there was no nudity. There was really no harsh language. You know, there were some deaths, but there wasn't anything super graphic. Enter Deadpool and Wolverine. And then you get this in the MCU and it's like, what just happened? Right. And so I think there would be an audience for it. I just don't know if that kind of thing matches the tone of what Star Wars is meant to be. Because with Marvel Comics, there's been comics with that kind of stuff in it. And so it's all over the place. Even with DC, there's stuff with that in it. Star Wars is kind of a thing that has always been for families and for kids and stuff like that. So them doing a project like that, I really don't see them ever doing anything unrated. I could be wrong, though. They might surprise us somewhere down the line and just release something that is like super brutal. And honestly, I'm kind of here for it. There's going to be a day at some point where you watch something in Star Wars, and actually, did they already do it? I feel like they might have already done it with Andor. Maybe not. Where before an episode of the series, they're like, you know, viewer discretion advised, the following episode's got content that's, you know, whatever. I'm waiting on the day we get a series like that it's for every episode. Something super brutal with Vader hunting down Jedi or something along those lines. But as far as the unrated or X-rated, I know that will never happen. I like to think that you meant unrated. And it's not that I hope you did. I just think that's kind of the direction you meant to go. And that's how I'm going to answer it. That's my answer for your question. I don't think if any of it's going to happen, if R, X, or unrated is ever going to happen, R-rated is probably the most likely to happen. But still very slim chance of that ever happening. Unrated behind that and X-rated is way down the line. So, like I said, if you want X-rated Star Wars stuff, there's no shortage of it on the internet. But not part of canon as far as I'm concerned. Not going to talk about it on this podcast. So thanks for the question, though, David. I do appreciate it. And the last question this week comes from Adam Rusk. And Adam Rusk writes in and says, "Hello, Brian. I was wondering, what are the odds of getting a High Republic or Old Republic movie in the near future now that Filoni is basically in charge of stories?" Thanks for the question, Adam. So this is going to happen well before we ever get an R-rated thing. And if I had to pick which one was going to happen first, it's going to be High Republic. Lucasfilm has put so many resources and so much effort into the High Republic, into that whole initiative, that I'm honestly shocked that they haven't already announced the High Republic movie. I'm honestly, genuinely shocked that we don't have an announcement for a High Republic film. We've had a series, Acolyte, for those of you that don't know, is still considered High Republic. We've had just a glorious collection of High Republic novels and that whole initiative. Now, granted, I haven't read the last 3 books. I need to go back and read them. I haven't read them yet. But that whole initiative was very successful. I think it drug out a little bit there at the end, I think is why I haven't read the last 3 books, because I think they could have shortened phase 3 a little bit and kind of don't bore us, get to the course kind of thing. But I think both are going to end up happening. I think we're definitely going to get High Republic. We're definitely going to get Old Republic. I think they're just now starting to kind of dip their toes into Old Republic. When they did, how long ago was it? It's been a couple years now. When they came out with all of the eras of Star Wars, and they said these are the new definitive eras of Star Wars. If you go to StarWarsCanon.net, I've got the timeline broken down into those eras. When they first came out with that, Old Republic was on there before High Republic. We just don't have anything in the Old Republic yet. We don't have anything in the Dawn of the Jedi, and then we have a lot of stuff. We have nothing in Old Republic, then we have a lot of stuff in High Republic, and then it's kind of like the content does this. There's like nothing, a whole crap load of stuff over the eras, and then it kind of tapers back off towards the end. But that tells me they do have plans for Old Republic. And we know they do now that they're coming out with this video game, Fate of the Old Republic. You know, obviously this is going to take place at I'm assuming the tail end of the Old Republic. It's the spiritual successor. We've talked about it on previous episodes. It's a spiritual successor to the Knights of the Old Republic games, which are not canon. Goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You can have canon stuff based off of things that are not canon. But if they're going to do a movie, you said movie, so specifically a movie. And if Dave Filoni is telling the stuff, we'll get High Republic before we do Old Republic, but we will get Old Republic. Like I said, I can't believe they haven't done a High Republic project yet. But granted, at the same time, they've already announced like 7,000 Star Wars movies, 6,998 of them, which are never going to be made. So at this point, if they came out and announced a High Republic movie, I'd be like, honestly, at this point with all movie announcements, I'm like, believe it when I see it, So, I would love for them to do a High Republic film. That kind of begs the question, would it be its own story or would it be like an adaptation of maybe some of the things that happened in the books? And I'm not a huge fan of book adaptations to films because most of the time there's so much stuff in a book. It takes, an average of 8, 10, 12 hours to read a book. To me, that's 8, 10, 12 hours of content. So it's for me, I'm not a huge fan of when they adapt books into film because you lose a lot of stuff in there. Even Lord of the Rings, as great as those movies are, there are full plot lines in the books that are never even mentioned in the movies. And those movies are still 3 hours long, And so I don't know how I'd feel about adaptation. But maybe movies that take place in that time period that bring some of those characters in the middle of what's going on in those books, I think that'd be okay. And maybe if you wanted to do so if you're going to do any kind of adaptation live action for High Republic, I think that needs to be a series. The first thing that's kind of coming to my mind, and granted, I haven't seen the series version of it yet. I've only seen the films. Harry Potter, right? So you've got 7 Harry Potter books. They did 8 movies. And so that's a great example. The last book, even though they split it into 2 movies, it still didn't have everything in it that was in the book. And it wasn't a fabulous adaptation. It was okay. You can tell it was based on it. But when you start doing adaptations to books, Harry Potter's a great example. The first 4 were pretty faithful. And then you get into 5 and 6, and they kind of went off in their own direction. And they were just loosely based on the books. And then 7 and 8 were of one book, and it still didn't have everything in it. So now they're doing the Harry Potter series, right? And each season's going to be a book, I think is what they've kind of said, which to me, I think makes a little bit more sense. You can squeeze a lot more into a series season than you can a movie. So I would almost say do a series maybe of High Republic. I wouldn't say phases. I wouldn't go that far, but maybe Light of the Jedi is a season of a show. So here's what you could do. You could do a series for the High Republic, an adaptation of those 3 main novels, right? So Light of the Jedi. Oh, you guys are going to hate me. What was the second one? I don't remember what the second book was. But then, The Fallen Star being the third one. Those 3 main novels. I could see a series where each season is a book and you do a 3-season arc and you talk about and you do an adaptation of it. And granted, there's comics happening. There's young adult, books that are happening in the middle of all this. And you could touch on those, but they're not essential to the story really. So you could kind of weave those in a little bit and do mentions of them or have some of these characters pop up, and have them cross paths and stuff in the series. If you were going to do anything High Republic, that would almost be the route I would go if it's an adaptation. Now, if you're doing an original story, by all means, come up with a movie that happens maybe before the Great Hyperspace Disaster, with Avar Kriss and Stellan Gios and all those, and kind of do a prequel story about them, maybe when they're younger, because there's some history there with them, right? And so you could do a story there that's original and kind of use the movie to lead into the books. I think that'd be kind of cool. But like at the same time, I don't know how High Republic ends yet. So I'm sitting here thinking maybe you could do like a follow-up film to, lead everything up to maybe. No, it's too late for that. I was going to say maybe do a film adaptation of the big finale for High Republic, but I don't think that would be a good idea because then you would have all this essential reading. You would have to read the 3 phases of an entire initiative to understand what's going on in one movie. Maybe that's not the right thing to do. Maybe if you do High Republic, you just do your own standalone story. You don't bring in these characters from the books. And maybe have it tied to maybe some of the events, but don't bring in like an Avar Chris or, these other, these Elzar man, you don't maybe bring him in either. But maybe cross paths with like maybe a Vernestra Rowe who was kind of out doing her own thing. You could kind of do a movie with Vernestra in it. Definitely please do her better than what he did in The Acolyte. Because the Acolyte Vernestra did not feel like the same Vernestra from the High Republic novels. But I'm sure you could do it. And I know there's stories there to be told. There's stories everywhere on the timeline to be told. And when it comes to Old Republic, honestly, I firmly believe that when this game Fate of the Old Republic comes out, I firmly believe there's going to be aspects of that game that are I think there's going to be mentions to the KOTOR games, and I think it's going to be one of those things where KOTOR's not canon, but if we mention it happening, that part of it is canon. I think that's what it's going to end up being. I hope they just say all of KOTOR 1 and 2 is canon now, and this is going to be what we end up doing. Like when they do this re-release of KOTOR, this remaster of it, I'm hoping that they're like, hey, canon now. So another great example of that is the novelization for Revenge of the Sith. They've always said that those novelizations are not canon. So the novelizations for 1, 2, and 3 are not canon. But they're canon where they line up with the movies. But now there's novels for the sequel films that are scenes in them that are not canon. So they're canon where they line up with the movies. So I've always considered those 3 also canon. But now they've re-released for like the 20th anniversary, the Revenge of the Sith novel, and instead of putting the Legends timeline in the cover, it's the canon timeline. So that tells me that book is now considered canon. It's on the canon timeline. So it's like it's kind of like that. I'm hoping that they end up doing that with the remakes of KOTOR, where they're like, hey, these are now considered canon because this is considered canon. There's definitely going to be Higher and Old Republic stuff coming. Filoni knows what makes a good story, in my opinion. I know some people, he's not their go-to guy. I understand that. Everything's subjective. You're not going to please everybody. I understand that. For me, Filoni is kind of like a go-to guy for storytelling. I don't necessarily think he's the greatest director, and it's not a bad thing on him. I don't mean anything bad toward Dave Filoni about that. I'm not necessarily sure he's the best director, but he's learning. That's the thing. He's definitely an animation guy. Just through and through, he's animation. And he's learning live action. And so I don't have an issue with, Ahsoka maybe having a couple of, weird, goofy looking little scenes or anything like that. Because like I said, the man's learning. But as far as storytelling goes, I think he could find somebody that could tell a really good Old Republic story, a really good High Republic story. And I think that he's the guy to sit down and to really weave it all together into canon and, hey, twerk this or tweak this. Twerk. I meant tweak. Tweak this, tweak that. And it'll fit into canon a lot better. And I know that he is aware of characters that we all know and love from Legends that we'd love to see in canon. I know Kyle Katarn has been brought up to him. And, he brought Thrawn in. I know Kyle Katarn's been brought up to him. I've seen somebody bring it up to him, and he's like, I hear that a lot, So I know he's aware of fan favorite characters. I know he knows that we want Revan. I know he knows we want that. So I'm not going to say no. I'm not going to put it past him. I definitely think that's in the future. How far down the line and where in the future, I'm not even going to try to speculate where that's going to fall in, as far as like being released. Not even going to try to come up with anything like that, but I think it is coming. I think it's something you just kind of need to be patient for. Let them. So right now they're really focused on this era between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. They're like what everybody, and I hate using this term, but what everybody else is referring to, the Mandoverse. I know that they're really focused on that time period right now. And I know they have a plan for that. I know Starfighter happens after 9. But the thing is, like they've said, we've got a plan moving forward now. is what they've said. We do have a plan moving forward, which is great. But just because you have a plan for this era doesn't mean you can't work in this era too. You know what I mean? So, yeah, by all means, focus on this era, but start dropping little projects over here for High Republic and for New Republic, or I'm sorry, Old Republic and High Republic, to kind of start laying the foundation so that when you are finished with this plan over here, you can start working on this plan. And so I think there's a time period coming very soon where we're going to wrap up everything in this era, in this saga, and we're going to go back. And that's when we're going to be getting the Old Republic stuff. So stay patient. I'm sure it's coming down the line. I'm probably going to be an old man before we really start getting into some really, really neat stuff. But as long as I'm getting Star Wars till the day I die, I really can't complain, because there was a dark time where we weren't getting anything, you know. So thanks for sending the question, Adam. I do appreciate it. Guys, that's going to do it for me for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and for joining me this week. Hopefully next week we've got a couple more people to grace your screen with, so you don't have to stare at my weird, ugly mug all episode. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe buttons. Make sure you guys follow us for all new content that we're going to be coming out with. Make sure to visit StarWarsCanon.net. There's some blog posts on there. We got the timeline on there. You can find the show on there, video and audio. Make sure to tell your friends about that website. I love that website so much. It's actually getting quite a bit of attention right now. So makes my heart happy to see that people are really liking going on there and reading stuff and are sending in mailbag questions. That really makes me that makes this whole thing seem worth it to me. You know, the whole reason and I've said this before, the whole reason I started this whole podcast and this whole YouTube channel was to meet like-minded folks, and even folks that had different opinions than me. And my whole point was to meet fellow Star Wars fans and to have good, healthy discussion and good debates and talk about the thing that we love the most in the world. So thank you guys for joining me this week. I do appreciate it. Keep an eye out for next week's episode. And until then, this is Brian signing off. May the Force be with you.